My stepmother, Evelyn, slid a $500 gift card across the polished mahogany table like she was presenting a prize to a kindergartner who'd finger-painted something mediocre. Her perfectly manicured nails clicked against the plastic card with deliberate precision. Her lips curled into a satisfied smirk that made my stomach turn. Her attorney, a stiff man in an expensive suit, cleared his throat and announced in a bored voice, "And that concludes Lauren Price's portion of the estate." The conference room fell silent, except for the quiet snickering from Evelyn's relatives clustered at the far end of the table. Her sister covered her mouth, pretending to cough but clearly laughing. Her brother shook his head with mock sympathy. My skin burned hot with humiliation. My father had been dead for exactly 2 weeks, and this was how his wife honored his memory. A gift card. $500 after a lifetime of being his only daughter. I opened my mouth to speak, to say something, anything, but before a single word could escape, the notary cleared his throat sharply. He was holding a second sealed envelope I'd never seen before. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably my father's shaky script. The notary's voice trembled slightly as he spoke, his eyes fixed on the mysterious envelope. "This wasn't included in the packet you provided, Mrs. Price." His wrinkled hands held the envelope carefully, like it contained something explosive. Evelyn's smirk dropped instantly from her face. Her mouth opened, then closed again. I watched her jaw clench so tight I could see the muscle twitching beneath her perfectly applied makeup. The entire room shifted. Everyone's eyes turned from me to the envelope, then to Evelyn, then back to the envelope again. Her attorney leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "What envelope?" I wasn't informed of any additional documents. The notary, an elderly man named Harold Pemberton, who'd worked with my father for over 30 years, set the envelope down on the table with deliberate care. This was delivered to my office directly by Mr. Price 3 weeks before his passing, with very specific instructions about when and how to present it. My heart pounded so violently I could hear it echoing in my ears. Evelyn's face had gone completely pale beneath her foundation. "My name is Lauren Price, and I never expected justice that day. I'd only come to the will reading for closure, not revenge. Certainly not vindication. I'd spent the last 2 weeks crying in my small apartment, mourning the father I'd slowly lost over the past 5 years. Not to death, but to Evelyn's careful, calculated manipulation. I sat in that leather chair wearing my only black dress, the one I'd bought on clearance 3 years ago. My hands were folded in my lap to hide how much they were shaking. Around me sat Evelyn's entire family. Her sister Pamela, who'd never spoken more than 5 words to me. Her brother, Charles, who'd made it clear from day one that I was an inconvenience. Their spouses, their adult children, all dressed in designer black, all there to witness what they thought would be my final humiliation. And there was Evelyn herself, sitting at the head of the table like a queen, wearing a black Chanel suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She'd been crying earlier, performing grief for the attorney and the notary. But I'd seen her smile when she thought no one was looking. I'd spent the last 5 years being pushed aside, slowly and methodically. It started so subtly I didn't even notice at first. Little things. Evelyn would rearrange the living room, and somehow my mother's photographs would end up in a box in the garage. Just updating the decor. "Sweetheart," she'd say with that fake sympathy in her voice. Then it was family dinners where I wasn't invited. "Oh, I thought your father told you it was just us this time." Then it was holidays where I'd show up to find I hadn't been included in the plans. "We assumed you were busy with your own friends, dear." My father, who'd once called me every Sunday without fail, started going weeks without contacting me. When I'd call him, Evelyn would answer. "He's resting right now. I'll have him call you back." He never did. At first I thought maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe grief over losing my mother 10 years ago was making me see problems that didn't exist. But the pattern was too consistent, too deliberate. Evelyn was erasing me from my father's life, one small cut at a time. Evelyn had married my father 3 years after my mother died. I was 22 then, fresh out of college and trying to start my career. Dad seemed happy again after years of mourning, and I was genuinely glad for him. Evelyn seemed nice enough at first. She was polite, well-dressed, charming. She brought wine to family dinners and complimented my apartment. But things changed the moment the wedding was over. Suddenly, I was no longer welcome to drop by the house unannounced. "You really should call first, Lauren. Your father and I value our privacy." Suddenly, family traditions my mother had started were outdated and needed to be replaced. Suddenly, my opinions about anything involving my father's life were met with condescending smiles and gentle dismissals. She had a way of speaking to me that made everything sound like concern but felt like criticism. "Are you sure that job is right for you, dear? You seem so stressed. Maybe you should think about settling down. Your father worries about you being alone. That dress is interesting, very bold choice." Each comment was a tiny knife, small enough to ignore individually, but together they cut deep. The isolation was the worst part. Evelyn controlled everything about my father's life with surgical precision. She controlled who visited and when. She controlled what information reached him and what didn't. She answered his phone, screened his emails, managed his calendar. "Your father is busy right now, sweetie. Your father isn't feeling well enough for visitors. Your father asked me to tell you he'll call you later." Except he never called. And when I showed up anyway, she'd meet me at the door with that same sympathetic smile. "He's sleeping. Doctor's orders, you understand." I was young enough to believe her at first. Young enough to think I was being the difficult one for pushing. Young enough to accept her excuses without question. But as time passed, I started noticing things, like how Dad only seemed too tired for visitors when I was the visitor. How Evelyn's family could drop by any time they wanted. How her friends were always welcome for lunch or dinner. How I was the only one who needed appointments scheduled weeks in advance. By the time I realized what was happening, I'd already lost years with my father. My father changed during those 5 years in ways that broke my heart. The vibrant, warm man who'd raised me alone after Mom died became quiet and withdrawn. When I did manage to see him, usually at family gatherings, Evelyn couldn't exclude me from without looking suspicious. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished. His laughter was forced. His smiles didn't reach his eyes anymore. He'd started sentences and then stopped mid-thought, glancing nervously at Evelyn before changing the subject. Once, I'd asked him directly if everything was okay. We were alone in the kitchen at Thanksgiving while Evelyn entertained guests in the other room. "Dad, are you happy?" I'd whispered. He'd looked at me with such sadness in his eyes. His mouth opened like he wanted to say something important, something urgent. But then Evelyn's heels clicked on the hardwood floor approaching, and his face shut down completely. "Of course, sweetheart. Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. I could see fear in him, though I didn't understand what he was afraid of. I only knew I was losing him, inch by inch, day by day, to a woman who smiled while she destroyed our relationship. The first real red flag came about a year before Dad got sick. I'd stopped by the house unexpectedly on a Saturday morning. Evelyn answered the door in her bathrobe, clearly annoyed, but hiding it behind her usual mask of politeness. "Lauren, what a surprise. We weren't expecting you." I'd brought Dad his favorite coffee and bagels from the shop we used to go to every weekend before Evelyn. She let me in reluctantly. I found Dad in his study, surrounded by papers and tax forms, looking confused and frustrated. "Hey, sweetheart," he'd said, genuinely happy to see me for the first time in months, "just trying to make sense of these financial documents." I'd noticed immediately that several forms had numbers that didn't match. Investment statements with missing pages. Bank records with unexplained withdrawals. Before I could ask about them, Evelyn swept into the room like a storm. She snatched the papers from the desk with surprising speed. "These are too complicated for you to worry about, Lauren." Her voice was sharp despite the smile. "Your father and I have it handled." The look in her eyes told me she knew exactly what I'd seen, and she was warning me not to ask questions. 8 months ago, Dad fell ill. It started as what Evelyn described as just a bad flu in a text message. Not a phone call. A text. I asked to come visit. She replied, "Doctor says no visitors. Don't want you to catch it." But the flu turned into pneumonia. Pneumonia turned into complications. Complications turned into hospitalization. And through it all, Evelyn kept me updated through cold, brief text messages that told me almost nothing. Still in hospital, resting. Doctors are monitoring him. He's too weak to talk right now. Every time I asked to visit, she had an excuse ready. Too many people in the ICU already. Hospital visiting hour restrictions. He was sleeping. He was having tests done. He specifically asked not to be disturbed. That last one hurt the most. The idea that my father didn't want to see me. But something deep in my gut told me it wasn't true. Something told me Evelyn was lying. I just couldn't prove it. Not yet. 2 months before he died, I showed up at the hospital unannounced. I'd taken a day off work and driven straight there early in the morning, before Evelyn would expect me. I'd brought flowers and the book Dad had been reading before he got sick. I was determined to see him, to talk to him, to tell him I loved him, and that I was there for him no matter what. I made it all the way to his floor before Evelyn intercepted me. She appeared in the hallway like she'd been waiting, blocking my path with a perfectly sympathetic smile plastered on her face. "Lauren, honey, what are you doing here?" Her voice was sweet as poison. "He's too tired for guests today. You should have called first." I tried to step around her. "He's my father. I don't need permission to see my own father." Her smile tightened. "The doctor specifically said." Through the closed door of his room, I heard it, weak and raspy but unmistakable. "Lauren? Is that Lauren?" My father's voice calling my name. I pushed past Evelyn, reaching for the door handle. She grabbed my wrist, surprisingly strong. "He's confused. The medication makes him disoriented. You'll only upset him." I yanked my hand away, but before I could open the door, she'd positioned herself between me and the entrance. "You need to leave. Now, or I'll call security." And she did. She actually called security and had me escorted from the hospital like I was some kind of threat, while my father called my name from the other side of that door. That day, something broke inside me, but it also crystallized my resolve. I started documenting everything, not for revenge. I didn't think that far ahead, but because something deep in my spirit told me the truth would matter eventually. I kept a journal with dates, times, every text message from Evelyn, every excuse, every blocked visit. I screenshotted bank statements I could access from accounts Dad had added me to years ago. I noticed large withdrawals that made no sense, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. I took pictures of medical bills that appeared in Dad's email, which I still had access to from when I'd helped him set up his computer years earlier. Bills for procedures Evelyn claimed weren't happening. Medications she said he wasn't taking. I collected everything like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite see yet. I contacted Dad's financial advisor, a man named Harold Pemberton, who'd worked with our family for decades. He seemed surprised to hear from me. "Your father hasn't returned my calls in over a year," he told me. "His wife handles everything now." That's when I knew for certain something was very wrong. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't discover until much later, was that my father had contacted Harold secretly. 6 weeks before he died, during a brief window when Evelyn had left the hospital to attend some function she couldn't miss, Dad had called Harold from a nurse's phone. His voice was weak but determined. "I need to revise my will. Immediately. And Evelyn cannot know." Harold had come to the hospital that same day with a lawyer and a notary. They'd met in a private consultation room while a sympathetic nurse kept watch. Dad had been clear-minded despite his illness, his intentions unmistakable. He dictated a new will, signed it, had it witnessed, and notarized properly. He'd explained everything to Harold. The missing money, the isolation, the control, the way Evelyn had systematically cut me out of his life while draining his accounts. He'd kept copies of bank statements, transaction records, everything he could gather in secret, and he'd given it all to Harold with one instruction. "Make sure my daughter gets the truth. Make sure Evelyn gets exactly what she deserves." Nothing. This second envelope, this secret will, was my father's final act of protection, his last stand against the woman who'd imprisoned him. But sitting in that conference room, I knew none of this yet. I only knew that something had shifted, and Evelyn looked terrified. Back in the conference room, Evelyn's voice came out shaky and too loud. "I demand you open that envelope right now. I have a legal right to know what's in my husband's estate documents." Her attorney nodded vigorously. "My client is correct. All estate documents should have been disclosed prior to this reading." Harold Pemberton, the notary, adjusted his glasses calmly. His voice was steady, professional, unbothered by their demands. Legal protocol requires I authenticate this document privately first. I need to verify the signatures, check the dates, and ensure this is, in fact, a valid and legally binding will revision. Evelyn's face turned an ugly shade of red. There is no other will. I would know if he'd changed anything. Harold looked at her with an expression that wasn't quite pity but close. Mrs. Price, your husband contacted me personally to execute this document. It was witnessed, signed, and notarized according to all legal requirements. The date on this envelope is more recent than the will we just read. The room erupted. Evelyn's sister gasped. Her brother stood up, demanding to see the document. Evelyn's attorney started making calls on his phone, but Harold simply gathered his papers and stood. I'm going to step into the private office to verify this document. This reading is temporarily suspended. The tension in that room could have shattered glass. Evelyn stood so fast, her leather chair rolled backwards and hit the wall. This is impossible. He wouldn't have done this without telling me. Her voice climbed higher with each word. Her attorney tried to calm her down. Mrs. Price, please, let's wait for verification before. No. She slammed her hand on the table, hard enough to make everyone jump. This is some kind of trick. She did this. She pointed at me with a shaking finger. She manipulated him. She must have forged his signature or confused him when he was medicated. Harold paused at the door, his hand on the handle. His voice cut through Evelyn's hysteria like a knife. Mrs. Price, I was your husband's notary and financial advisor for over 30 years. I watched him build his estate from nothing. I know his signature better than my own. He paused deliberately. This signature is authentic, and this will was executed while your husband was of completely sound mind. I witnessed it myself. The room went dead silent. Evelyn's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Harold continued, his voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. Furthermore, there are additional documents attached to this will: financial records, transaction logs, signed affidavits. His eyes locked on Evelyn. Your husband was very thorough. 20 agonizing minutes later, Harold returned to the conference room. The atmosphere had changed completely. Evelyn sat rigid in her chair, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. Her relatives whispered among themselves, shooting suspicious glances her way. Her attorney sat stiffly, his phone still in his hand, clearly having made some calls of his own. I sat exactly where I'd been, the ridiculous $500 gift card still lying on the table in front of me like evidence of my humiliation. Harold settled into his chair, opened the envelope with careful precision, and pulled out a thick stack of papers. This is the last will and testament of Patrick Michael Price, executed 6 weeks ago, superseding all previous versions. He began reading in his steady, professional voice. I, Patrick Michael Price, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils. Evelyn gripped the edge of the table. I leave the entirety of my estate, including all bank accounts, investment portfolios, retirement accounts, real estate holdings, and personal property, to my daughter, Lauren Elizabeth Price. The room exploded. Evelyn screamed. Her sister gasped and grabbed her brother's arm. Her attorney dropped his phone. Furthermore, Harold continued, raising his voice over the chaos, I explicitly state that my wife, Evelyn Marie Price, is to receive no portion of my estate due to documented financial misconduct and emotional abuse. Evelyn stood so violently her chair tipped over completely, crashing to the floor. Lies! All lies! She poisoned him against me. She tricked him. Her face was purple with rage, all pretense of grief completely gone. Her attorney stood too, trying to regain control of the situation. This is highly irregular. I'll need to review those documents. There are legal grounds to contest. Harold cut him off sharply. You'll need to be quiet and let me finish. He'd never been rude before, but his patience had clearly run out. He looked directly at Evelyn. Your husband discovered unauthorized withdrawals from your joint accounts beginning approximately 14 months ago. He documented every transaction. He pulled out a separate folder thick with bank statements. Over the course of 13 months, you transferred $347,000 from various accounts into a private account he didn't have access to. The number hit the room like a bomb. Even Evelyn's relatives gasped. Her sister's face went white. You were stealing from him? Pamela whispered. Evelyn's mouth worked soundlessly. That's not. He gave me access to those accounts. I had every right. You had access, Harold interrupted coldly. But you did not have authorization to drain them systematically while lying to him about household expenses and medical bills. Harold wasn't finished. He pulled out more documents, spreading them across the table like accusations. Mr. Price hired a private investigator 6 months before his death. These are the findings. He began reading from a typed report. Subject Evelyn Price was observed making numerous large cash deposits to account ending in 4739. Subject met with real estate agent regarding property purchases in Scottsdale, Arizona. Subject was seen dining with attorney specializing in estate planning, not the family attorney, discussing asset protection strategies. Each revelation hit harder than the last. Evelyn had been planning something, building a new life somewhere else with my father's money. Harold continued, his voice growing harder. Mr. Price also documented systematic isolation tactics. Phone records show you answering his personal phone and not relaying messages from his daughter. Email logs show you deleting emails from Lauren before he could read them. Medical staff at the hospital confirmed you had visitors restricted to a pre-approved list that did not include his daughter. He looked at Evelyn with undisguised disgust. You isolated a dying man from his only child while stealing his money. He knew, he documented everything, and he made sure you would face consequences. Evelyn's family turned on her, like wolves smelling blood. Her brother Charles stood up, his face red with fury. You were siphoning money? From your dying husband? Her sister Pamela stepped physically away from Evelyn's chair. Is that why you kept asking me for loans? Because you were hiding stolen money? Evelyn's daughter-in-law, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. This is why you wanted to sell his house so fast. You were going to take everything before anyone noticed. Even Evelyn's own son, who'd driven in from California for the reading, looked at his mother with confusion and disgust. Mom, is this true? For the first time since I'd known her, Evelyn looked genuinely afraid. Not angry, not manipulative, afraid. She reached toward her sister desperately. Pamela, you have to understand, I was protecting my future. He was going to leave everything to her anyway. He was your husband. Pamela cut her off, her voice shaking. He trusted you. Charles grabbed his coat. I'm leaving. I want nothing to do with this. Her son followed. I can't believe you, Mom. I can't. One by one, her family gathered their things and walked out, leaving Evelyn standing alone at the head of the table, her mask finally completely shattered. Even her attorney abandoned her. He'd been making quiet phone calls during Harold's revelations, and now he stood, closing his briefcase with deliberate finality. Mrs. Price, you didn't disclose any of these transactions to me when I prepared the original will documents. You claimed there were no financial irregularities, no disputes, no complications. He shook his head. I cannot continue to represent you. This crosses ethical lines I'm not willing to cross. Evelyn grabbed his arm desperately. You can't leave me. I'm paying you. He pulled his arm away. Not anymore. You're not. I'm withdrawing as your legal counsel immediately. You'll need to find someone else willing to touch this mess. He turned to Harold. I assume you'll be filing the appropriate reports with the authorities? Harold nodded grimly. I'm legally obligated to. The attorney headed for the door, then paused. Mrs. Price, you should probably get a criminal defense lawyer, not an estate attorney. You're going to need one. And then he was gone. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid sealing shut. Evelyn stood alone, her expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume, her makeup streaked with tears, her hands shaking visibly. Harold pulled out yet another document, this one with official letterhead. As the executor of this estate and a licensed notary, I'm required by law to report suspicious financial transactions. The documentation Mr. Price provided shows clear evidence of elder financial abuse and fraud. Evelyn's face went completely white. The relevant authorities will be contacted within 24 hours, as is my legal duty. I'm not doing this for revenge or punishment. I'm doing this because it's my professional and legal obligation. He gathered the papers carefully. Furthermore, all accounts connected to this estate are frozen as of this moment pending investigation. That includes the joint accounts, the credit cards in Mr. Price's name, and any authorized user accounts. Evelyn's phone buzzed, then again, then continuously. She pulled it out with shaking hands and stared at the screen. Alert after alert flashed across it. Transaction declined, account frozen, credit card deactivated. Her entire financial identity was unraveling in real time, right there in front of us. She sank into her chair, the phone still buzzing in her hand like an angry wasp. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "This can't be real." But it was real. More real than anything she'd orchestrated over the past 5 years. The web of lies she'd woven so carefully was catching her instead of me. The practical consequences began immediately. Harold explained in his clinical, professional voice exactly what would happen next. The estate will enter probate. All assets will be cataloged and assessed. The court will review the evidence of financial misconduct. There will be hearings. Evelyn's hands twisted together in her lap. As the legal beneficiary, Lauren will have access to all accounts once probate is complete. That process typically takes 6 to 8 months, barring complications. He looked directly at Evelyn. "You have 30 days to vacate the residence. The house is part of the estate and now belongs to Lauren. You may take personal belongings that you brought into the marriage, but all jointly acquired property remains with the estate." Evelyn's head snapped up. 30 days? Where am I supposed to go? Harold's expression didn't change. "That's not my concern, Mrs. Price. Her credit cards had been in my father's name. Her car lease was through his business account. Even her club memberships were connected to accounts that were now frozen. Everything she'd built her life on for the past 5 years was connected to my father's money. Money she'd stolen, money she no longer had access to. This is insane," she shouted, finding her voice again. "I'm his widow. I have rights." Harold shook his head slowly. "You have the right to contest the will, but given the documented evidence of fraud, I don't recommend it." Evelyn turned to me desperately, her entire demeanor changing in an instant. The rage disappeared, replaced by a mask of vulnerability I'd seen her use on my father countless times. Her voice went soft, pleading, almost childlike. "Lauren, sweetie, we can fix this." She reached across the table toward me. "I know things got complicated between us. I know I made mistakes, but we're family. We can work this out." I looked at her hand extended toward me and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no satisfaction. Just a cold, clear certainty. "There's nothing to fix that wasn't broken by you," I said quietly. Her eyes filled with tears, real ones this time, probably the first genuine tears she'd shed since Dad died. "Please, I have nowhere to go. I have nothing." I stood up, gathering my purse. "You have exactly what you deserve, what you chose for yourself when you chose to steal from a dying man." She grabbed my wrist, her grip desperate. "I'm begging you, don't do this to me." I removed her hand gently but firmly. "I'm not doing anything to you. You did this to yourself." Harold handed me a folder with copies of the new will and contact information. "We'll be in touch about next steps, Lauren." Harold pulled one final document from the envelope. This one in a separate, smaller envelope with my name written on it in Dad's familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I took it from him. "Your father asked me to give this to you directly. He wrote it the day he revised his will." I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, 2 pages in Dad's handwriting, shakier than I remembered, but still unmistakably his. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. "My dearest Lauren, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you in person what was happening. I'm sorry I let her come between us. I was weak when I should have been strong. I knew she was isolating us. I knew what she was taking from me, not just money, but time with you, moments we'll never get back. But she will not take anything more from you. Everything I built, everything I saved, everything I worked for, it was always meant to be yours. You are my legacy. You are what I'm most proud of. Don't let guilt or doubt make you question this. You deserve every penny. Use it wisely. Live fully. Be happy. And know that even when I couldn't reach you, even when she kept us apart, I loved you every single day. Always, Dad." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. When I looked up, Evelyn was crying, but I felt no sympathy, only a profound sadness for the time she'd stolen. I stood, quietly gathered my things and walked toward the door. Behind me, Evelyn was begging, pleading with Harold, with anyone who would listen. This isn't fair. I was his wife. I took care of him. But no one was listening anymore. Her consequences were her own doing, not mine. At the door, I paused and looked back one final time. Not at Evelyn, but at the conference room itself. The place where I'd expected humiliation and received justice instead. "Goodbye, Evelyn," I said quietly. She looked up at me, mascara running down her face, all her polish and perfection completely destroyed. "I hope you find whatever it was you were looking for in Scottsdale." Then I walked out of that office, out of that building, out of that chapter of my life. The afternoon sun hit my face, warm and bright. I breathed deeply, feeling lighter than I had in 5 years. My phone buzzed. A text from Harold. "Estate valued at $1.7 million plus property. Your father was a good man who loved you very much." 6 months later, I sat in my new office, looking out over the city from the 15th floor. I'd used part of the inheritance to start the business I'd always dreamed of, a financial literacy nonprofit, helping young people avoid predatory relationships and understand their rights. I'd named it the Patrick Price Foundation, after my father. The rest of the money I'd invested wisely, bought a modest but comfortable home, and set aside for the future Dad had wanted me to have. Evelyn had been charged with elder financial abuse. Her trial was pending. I'd been called as a witness, but hadn't seen her since that day in the conference room. I didn't need to. I'd moved forward, not because I'd destroyed her, but because the truth had. I kept Dad's letter in my desk drawer. On hard days, I read it and remembered that love doesn't always look like presents. Sometimes it looks like protection from beyond the grave. I didn't destroy Evelyn's life. She did that herself, the moment she chose greed over integrity. I just walked away with everything she tried to steal from me. And every single day, I honored my father's memory by living fully, peacefully, and without bitterness. Because that's what he wanted for me. That's what he fought for, even when he couldn't fight for himself. And that's exactly what I gave him. A daughter who survived, who thrived, and who never forgot where she came from or who truly loved her.